30 days. Think about that number for a second. 30 days since an 84-year-old woman was taken from her bed in the middle of the night in one of the most surveilled, most resourced, most publicly followed missing person investigations that this country has seen in years. 400 investigators, 50,000 tips, 10,000 hours of surveillance footage, $1 million reward. FBI Director Kash Patel posting updates on Instagram, the President of the United States saying he was deploying all federal resources. And on day 30, what are investigators doing? They are in the Arizona desert, following cell tower coordinates, looking for a body. Let that land, not looking for a suspect, not executing an arrest warrant, not announcing a breakthrough. Looking for a body in remote desert terrain based on data showing that a phone connected to this case was at specific coordinates in the hours after Nancy disappeared. That is where this investigation is on day 30. And I think we need to talk about what that actually means, because the coverage has been so focused on the daily update cycle that the larger picture has gotten lost somewhere between the tip count announcements and the press conference statements about ongoing leads. Ashleigh Banfield reported this on March 2nd on her program, Drop Dead Serious. Banfield is not a tabloid reporter. She has been covering major crime stories for 3 decades, for Court TV, for MSNBC, for CNN, for News Nation. When she reports that investigators went to a specific desert location based on cell tower coordinates looking for a body, that information came from sources with knowledge of the investigation. Sources who knew what those coordinates were and why investigators were there. That is not speculation dressed up as reporting. That is reporting. So what does it mean? Cell tower triangulation works by tracking which towers a phone connects to as it moves. Every phone, even one that is not being used for calls, is constantly communicating with the nearest towers just to stay connected to the network. Those connections get logged automatically by carriers for operational reasons. When investigators subpoena those records, they can trace a phone's movement through an area with a level of precision that depends entirely on how many towers are in range and how close together they are. In a city, that precision can be a few hundred feet. In remote desert, where towers are spread miles apart, you might be looking at a search radius of 1 to 3 miles around the coordinates. That is still an enormous amount of terrain, but it is manageable terrain compared to the entire Arizona desert. It is a place where investigators believe a phone connected to this case spent time in the hours after Nancy was taken. And here is the question I keep coming back to. Whose phone? Because this matters enormously. If investigators have identified a suspect through DNA genealogy, through retail forensics, through digital evidence, and they pulled that suspect's cell records and saw the phone traveling to remote desert coordinates after 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, that is a different situation than if they are still working from a pool of unknown phones that were near Nancy's neighborhood that night. The first scenario means they have a name. The second means they are still building toward one. The distinction between those two realities is the difference between an investigation that is close to resolution and one that is still in the middle of the process. We have not been told which scenario we are in. And that silence, 30 days in, with a desert search happening, and no public statement about what that search found or did not find, is the thing that I cannot stop thinking about. Now I want to be honest with you, because I think this audience deserves honesty more than it deserves a version of events that is tidied up to feel satisfying. The lack of a public announcement about search results could mean several things. It could mean nothing was found, and investigators are continuing to work other leads. Searches fail. Evidence degrades in 30 days of desert heat. Scavengers disturb remains. Cell tower precision leaves a search area of several square miles, and teams can work systematically through that area and still miss what they are looking for. A search that was justified by the data can still come up empty for reasons that have nothing to do with the data being wrong, but it could also mean something was found and results are being withheld pending confirmation. If remains were located, DNA identification takes time. A match has to be made. A family has to be notified through proper channels before any public announcement. That process does not happen in hours. It can take days or weeks. The absence of an announcement is not the same as the absence of a finding, or it could mean the search is still ongoing. Thorough coverage of a multi-mile desert search area takes time, and Banfield's report came during the search, not necessarily after its completion. What I am not willing to do is tell you that I know which of those things is true. I do not. Nobody outside the investigation does. And anyone who is presenting certainty about what was or was not found in that desert search is presenting something they cannot actually know. What I can tell you is what the search itself tells us about the state of the investigation regardless of its results. Investigators do not commit resources to remote desert searches without reason. The logistics alone, getting personnel and equipment to terrain that has no roads or infrastructure, deploying K9 teams trained to detect human remains, potentially using ground-penetrating radar to check for subsurface disturbance, potentially running aerial drones with thermal imaging, that is not something you do on a hunch. You do it when you have data pointing you there. Specific, credible, technologically derived data showing that a phone connected to this case was at those coordinates at a time that is consistent with what would have happened if someone transported Nancy away from her home after 2:28 in the morning. That data exists. The search happened. Those are facts. And here is where my frustration with how this case has been managed publicly becomes something I need to say directly, because I have been watching this for 30 days, and I keep seeing the same pattern. Every time a credible piece of reporting surfaces from sourced journalists, the official response is designed to neither confirm nor deny, in a way that leaves the public more confused than informed. 3 independent newsrooms reported the two-visit theory. ABC, CNN, CBS, all with separate sources, all saying the doorbell images came from different days. The official response was that it was speculative because no timestamps existed. Technically accurate, operationally evasive, because if 3 major newsrooms with separate sourcing all independently arrive at the same conclusion, the gap between what their sources are saying privately and what officials are saying publicly is not a gap in the evidence. It is a gap in the communication strategy. I am not saying investigators are failing. 400 people working 30 days on a single case without sleeping is not failure. The forensic genealogy process that may be running on the glove DNA right now, if the Florida lab produced a viable profile, that is not failure. That is science operating on a timeline that does not bend to public impatience. The retail forensics connecting the Ozark Trail backpack to a specific transaction at a specific Walmart location, that is not failure either. That is meticulous work that takes as long as it takes. But I am asking a different question. Not are investigators working hard? Obviously they are. The question is whether the public communication around this case has served the investigation or complicated it. Because there is a real argument that the daily update cycle, the press conferences that revealed operational details about the doorbell camera and the DNA and the Florida lab, created a situation where the suspect, whoever he is, has been able to monitor exactly what investigators know and do not know in something close to real time. Every announcement about a DNA sample being sent to Florida for analysis is an announcement to the person who left that DNA about how far behind the identification process is. Every statement about cell tower coordinates and desert searches, if covered publicly before results are confirmed, is information that someone might use. I am not the FBI. I do not know what they know. Maybe total transparency with the public has generated tips that would not have come otherwise, and those tips are worth the operational exposure. The $1 million reward was delayed specifically because law enforcement was managing the information environment, and that is a legitimate tactical consideration. So I hold this concern without certainty, because I am aware of how much I cannot see from outside the investigation. What I do know is this. Forensic criminologist Dr. Tracy Sargent, who appeared with Banfield to analyze the Day 30 desert search, explained something that I think cuts through all the noise about tips and rewards and press conferences. She said that when law enforcement narrows focus to a specific remote location and commits resources to physically searching it, that decision indicates they have information they assess as credible and significant. Searches are not conducted casually, remote desert searches least of all. Investigators went to that desert. They had coordinates. They had a reason to be there that came from hard data, not intuition and not guesswork. Whatever they found or did not find, the fact of that search tells you something real about where the investigation stands on Day 30. It is no longer a neighborhood canvassing operation. It is no longer about knocking on doors and asking for ring footage. It has moved into a phase where digital evidence has produced specific geographic targets in remote terrain. That is a different kind of investigation than the one that started on February 1st. The camera on Camino Real recorded a vehicle at 2:36 in the morning, and that footage sat untouched for 25 days because a perimeter was drawn at 2 miles and the house was at 2.5. Cell tower data pointed investigators to desert coordinates on day 30. 10,000 hours of surveillance footage are sitting in an archive being reviewed in real time, which means they cannot be reviewed any faster than the hours themselves contain. This is a case where the evidence exists, where the data is there, where the forensic threads are being pulled, and where the answers are somewhere inside the backlog of information that investigators are working through. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie was born January 27, 1942. She was taken from her home on February 1, 2026. She has been gone for 30 days. Her family is waiting. And somewhere in an Arizona desert, on coordinates identified through cell tower analysis, investigators went looking for answers. We do not yet know what they found.